Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I'm excited to be hosting another virtual event tonight. Tonight, we are joined by several authors from Agora Press, including Chantel Osman, who's the editor. She'll be moderating the event. But for those of you watching, you're really in for a treat tonight. I think that this is our most internationally studied event that we've done. We have an author joining us from London, one from India, and one from Spain. So make sure you have lots of questions and you're interactive because they are joining us in the wee hours of the morning. And I'm really grateful that they're here. It should be a terrific event. As always, if you want more information about the authors or their books, or if you would like to order them, I'm putting a link in the comments right now. It'll also be in the live chat on YouTube. I do want to mention something that we do this time of year. I think this is our third year doing it. We're one of the bookstores that participates in the Evelyn Swarzinski book drive, benefiting the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. In just a minute, I will also put a link in the comments for more information about that. But it is a book drive in honor of someone who was lost too early to one of our favorite crime writers. And in her memory, they started this book drive. And so we collect books that can be purchased through our website, or you can drop off new books. A lot of the children are immunocompromised, so they can't be gently read. It needs to be new purchases. And then we mail everything to LA. So that's going on through the first week of December. Like I said, I'll put more information in the comments about that. Also, if you don't know what to order, you're welcome to purchase a gift card, and we can put that gift card towards whatever books are left or whatever books we think would make a more well-rounded selection and mail them to LA. So that information is coming soon, but let's go ahead and get started with the evening. As always, if you have questions, put them in the comments on Facebook or in the live chat on YouTube. The first author that I'm going to bring on is Eloísa Díaz. Hi, how are you?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. You have a late night there in Spain, so this is hopefully going to be fun for you and worth your time and energy. I'm going to go ahead and get you introduced, and then we'll bring on the next person. So Eloísa Díaz is a writer and lawyer. She studied law at the Pantheon-Sorbonne University in Paris, then completed her MFA in creative writing from Columbia University. And she's here tonight to discuss Repentance, which is her debut novel. Thanks again for being here. We also have Amita Murray. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm really good, thank you. It's 1 a.m. and I'm waking myself up.
Okay, well, again, I think it's going to be a great panel, and thank you for staying up late to do this. I will do your bio as well really quickly. Amita Murray is a writer based in London by way of Delhi in California. Her first novel, The Trouble with Rose, was published by HarperCollins in 2019. Her short fiction won the SI Leeds Literary Prize and has appeared in Sand Berlin, the Berkeley Fiction Review, and others. She's held writerly residences with the University of College London and Plymouth University Literature Works, and has taught advanced fiction at the University of East Anglia and City Lit London. She's here tonight to talk about Aria Winters and the Tiramisu of Death. Thank you again for being here. All right. And we have Arvi Rahman, who I have had the pleasure to interview and speak with when Will to Kill came out and was one of our best of the month selections. But I'm so glad to see you again here tonight. And you're joining us from India, where it's also the wee hours of the morning, just a little bit later, correct?
Yes, it is. So wonderful to be back on the show.
Well, thanks for being here. Arvi Rahman is the author of the Inspector Renaud and the Inspector Dhruvi thrillers, published in India, which are loosely based on his corporate career spanning 3 decades of 4 continents. His latest book, published by Agora Books in 2020, A Will to Kill, is the first in the Harith Athraya series, and is an Agatha Christie-esque whodunit set in India. In addition to writing, he teaches business strategy at the Indian Institute of Management. And like I said, we hosted you earlier, and A Will to Kill was one of my very, very favorite books when it came out. I actually think it came out maybe in February of this year, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was a little later than what the bio said. But if you have not read it, we have been hand selling it for some time and highly recommend it. And last but not least, we have the editor of Agora Books, Chantal Osman. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you. Thrilled to be in one room with my authors for the first time.
I know, it's incredible. It's incredible. It's always a treat when I know you're going to be doing one of these events. Not only do I get to sit back and relax, but I know it's also going to be a really well done chat. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go away and leave you guys to it, and I'll see you in about 45 minutes.
That's wonderful. Thank you again so much, McKenna.
My pleasure.
And thank you to Murder by the Book for giving us this wonderful opportunity. Not only do we do something every month with them for Polis and Agora authors, but this one's particularly special since we have the opportunity to talk to an author in Spain, one in London, and one in India in the midst of a terrible storm. So we're particularly glad that he can join us tonight. So I was going to start with, tell us a little bit about your book, but I'd rather really dive into it because there's 3 really interesting authors, and I'm hoping that we have a lot of questions from the audience. So I'll start with one of mine, which is probably less exciting than what yours will be. But one of the things that I love about all 3 of your writing is that setting is so much a character. It's as much a character in all 3 of these books, well, technically 4, because Venkat's next book is out next month, of these books as the protagonist is. So in Venkat's, we have a haunted mansion in the Misty Hills and A Will to Kill. And in the second book, A Dire Isle, out next month, it's an archaeological dig on the banks of a river. In Eloísa's, we have a riot-torn streets of 1981 and 2001 Buenos Aires. And in Amita's, we have the, I'll say, quote unquote, typical English village outside of London with the typical high street and typical quirky residents who are, as we will discover, anything but typical. But I'd like you all to tell us a little bit of the choices that went into the locations for you. Like, did the story come first and then you found the appropriate setting to tell it in? Or were the 2 kind of inseparable? So let's start with Eloísa and Repentance in Argentina.
Indeed, Repentance takes place in Buenos Aires over 2 time frames. So we have 1981 and 2001. And Buenos Aires kind of took the weight of a character from quite early on. Even though initially it was just a means to complicate his day, I wanted for him to have a difficult day, to struggle and to amp up the tension. And for that, the 2001 riots were ideal, let's say, in a Machiavellian writerly way. Of course, not for the people living it, no. So from very early on, it imprinted the language, the rhythm, the idiosyncrasies, Buenos Aires' dark past in the 70s and 80s. And it was an easy choice to make for me.
Well, that's a really good answer. And let's go over to Amita and her little typical, atypical English village.
Thanks, Chantal. Aria is one of those books. When I wrote it, it just sort of flew out. I didn't have to think about it too much. So it's many of my choices aren't choices. They are just things that have just come out on the page by themselves as if fully formed. And Aria, the main character, is like that, and Trucklewood, the made-up English village, is like that as well. I always loved, when I was growing up, I read a lot of Agatha Christie, and I always loved, and I still love, psychological motivation for crimes. I like that. I don't like I do appreciate the thrillers with the big kind of Russian spies and the all the other kind of stuff. But for me, when I'm writing, the psychological motivation of the killer and the other characters are really important. So setting it in this kind of cozy village seemed very natural for that. The Aria, the main character, she's young, in her late 20s. She's a baker. So there's some quaint villagey touches, but then there's the sort of the macabre kind of angle that then comes in. So yeah, I didn't even think about it. It's such an easy book for me. It felt very, very, very me. Yeah, so Trucklewood is completely made up.
Can't hear you.
You would think that after I don't know how long I could figure to unmute myself. I was going to say that readers will absolutely love this quirky village. And Venkat, I mean, I know that each book, and I know that the books that will come out later in the series, they all very much are defined by their location. So can you tell us a little bit about how you chose Nilgris for the first one, and then the river near Jhansi for the second book?
Yeah, so let me start with the first book. Before I wrote Will to Kill, as you know, I have written 4 thrillers set in India, which are based on corporate fraud and murder, which is a result of corporate fraud. From the time I started writing, I've always wanted to write something which is similar to Christie, a kind of a homage to the author I like the most. And when I was looking, once I did the 4 books, and I had the confidence to write a whodunit, the first thing I started looking at is what should be the setting. In this particular case, a country mansion in the remote hills is a classic setting, be it from Christie or Conan Doyle or anybody, right? So I decided the setting first, and then came to the character. My earlier books had a male police inspector and then a female police inspector. So I wanted something different. So I made this person a retired middle-aged person. And once I started writing that, I also felt that the fiction that we have, at least the crime fiction that we have in India and globally, don't really take the readers to locations where they should be going. Most of the fiction is set in big cities. I wanted to move away from that. And then in the new series, I decided that each book is going to be set in a different location where people don't get there. So that's how I picked the country mansion in the hills for the first book. And as I was writing that, I thought that India's history should also come out. Maybe it comes out through mythology, maybe it comes out through geography, whatever it is, it comes out. As I was writing it, I decided to have the second book also set in a remote Indian corner. And that was facilitated by my nephew's wedding. He got married in Bundelkhand, which is near Jhansi, on the banks of a river. It was a resort. As soon as I visited that, I saw that was a fantastic location for a murder mystery. So I took that and made the second book. You're muted.
It's really funny because both you and Amita brought up something that I wanted to talk to you about as well, which is, you both mentioned Agatha Christie, and Venkat, you mentioned Conan Doyle, and both of you have written series or are writing series. Amita, we're only on the first so far, but I may have seen a preview on number 2. But I always think of how much they both hated. Christie hated Poirot. Conan Doyle kept trying to kill off Holmes. So I know that in writing a series, you have to come up with a protagonist that, well, you can live with for a long time. I know that you both gave a little bit of an idea, Amita, particularly you, about your protagonist, but can you tell me what considerations for both of you for the series, and Eloísa, I have a follow-up for you in a minute, but starting with Amita, what considerations went into crafting somebody who you're going to spend so much time writing?
What a good question. Thank you. I love Aria. It's a strange thing to say about your own character, but to me, she's a completely different person from me. I didn't create her. She just sort of is her own person. She's such a strong personality. To me, partly she's someone that I want to be because she's so forthright and to the point of being blunt and rude at times. I want to be like her. I feel like I'm the kind of person who, if someone says something vaguely hurtful, I'll freeze, and then I'll go back later and think about it, and and then maybe be able to react in a sort of a long email or something. But Aria is the kind of person who always knows, she can do the zinger right away. So anyone says something, even if it's not necessarily hurtful, even if it's just a bit boring or a bit needy or something, Aria will call them on it right away. And I've always wanted to be that forthright person, that always knows exactly what to say. So I like that about her. The other thing is, Aria is also someone who has sort of strength and vulnerability about her, and I really, really connect with that as well. The kind of, she's so strong and so gutsy, and so she's survived childhood trauma. She's survived the loss of her auntie recently. As she lives on her own, she's built a business for herself, but at the same time, she's so acutely vulnerable. She wants to be loved, but she doesn't want to be loved on anyone else's terms. She wants to be loved for herself, for her own sake. She fears that she can't be loved. She's afraid of that. So she constantly puts up people's backs because she feels, she has to put up defenses. But she, at the same time, she's got so much attitude. She's got so much passion. I wanted a character that was young, relatable, looking for love, but afraid of it at the same time. That's able to kind of express her desire, many desires for love, for sex, for acceptance, for belonging. She gets lonely. She can talk about that. So I feel very, sort of passionate about Aria. So that's my main character.
And that passion absolutely comes across on the page. Now, what about Venkat, our intrepid inspector? What went into creating him, and why do you want to keep him around?
Yeah. So before I answer that, let me just go back to my earlier protagonist, Inspector Dhruvi, who's a 28-year-old lady inspector in Bangalore. I created her very specifically because she was the daughter I never had. I have two boys. If I had a daughter, how would she be? I think Dhruvi reflects that. So by the time I came to Atreya, he was my third protagonist. There was first Inspector Ranade, then Inspector Dhruvi, and then this person. I think in many ways, Atreya reflects the character I am. That's what most of my friends and relatives who read the book say that. Like the earlier speaker said, he has his positives, he has his negatives, he has his weaknesses, which you will see in Dire Isle. He's subject to panic attacks, he's subject to claustrophobia. So there is that balance. And one of the things I wanted to do was for him to be different from many of the protagonists you see in crime fiction. The standard formula is a male who has a broken marriage, who has family problems, and is dealing with all of that, and the crime comes along. I wanted to move away from that. So if you look at Poirot or many of the Golden Age mystery protagonists, they don't have that. They are pure investigators. That was the mold in which I wanted to cast him. To your question of do I want to have him around, strangely enough, I feel very comfortable with this person. Compared to my earlier protagonist, I feel very, very comfortable with this person. Writing him comes easily, and it's probably because he reflects a part of me. And more importantly, I want the series to continue because India is so large, so vast. There are so many different places I can take my readers to. So for that, Atreya is my vehicle.
That's really interesting, and I think Eloísa is going to present an interesting juxtaposition, because we saw with Amita and Venkat that they were either parts of the author, their protagonists were, or something that they wanted to be. I don't know that that's necessarily true with Inspector Alzada, who, unlike the other two, is not a series character. So the question for you, Eloísa, is kind of twofold. First of all, tell us a little bit about Inspector Alzada, and also, what went into your decision to write a standalone rather than a series, or may we see Alzada again?
Well, thank you for your question. To begin with, Joaquin Alzada is indeed a white male, middle-aged. I don't think he has trouble in his marriage.
No.
That might be the only one thing that he doesn't, one box that he doesn't check in that trope regard. And I might agree with my colleagues that he lives a bit in me. Also because we've spent like 7 years together, which is the 7 years that it took me to write. So it was an easy flow with him, or a kind of a love-hate. And I had these moments of very clearly being in a situation and think, oh, Alzada would hate this, of him co-living with me in a sense. And I find it quite interesting that these characters, not only him, result in a kind of Rorschach test for the reader, because so many people have come up to me and said, oh, I reckon people who know me, come up to me and said, oh, you're totally Inspector Alzada. And some of them would be like, oh no, you're so much like Estratico. I like how you put yourself in the deputies. You're the foil to the Alzada inspector, or some other third or fourth characters. So I loved seeing that from the readers, like how they perceived me and how it resembled Alzada or not. And regarding the second prong of the question, the standalone, I'm open to the possibility. I never thought about being able to finish the first novel, since this is my debut novel. So I thought it would be more than ambitious to think it in terms of a series. I just set out to survive writing the first one, and then we would see what happened. Joaquin is nearing retirement age in the book. And I'm well aware that most detectives are not allowed to retire or to go on vacation. It's a certain kind of rule that there can be an incident that brings him back from retirement into that most important case that he needs to solve. So yeah, I'm excited for the possibilities that Alzada might. I still hear him sometimes, if it's a bit weird to say. So I'm open to that possibility to write him again.
I think it would be tremendous fun, especially once those of you who are listening and haven't read Repentance yet, once you get to know him, I think it would be tremendous fun to see him on vacation or having to come back from that. It's just, it would just be a very interesting aspect of his personality. And I also thought that something else that you said is I think it resonates with a lot of authors. I'm guessing the idea that, it's a Rorschach test where they put you in your own book. But I know that a lot of authors will say, they have friends or people who are relatives come up and say, oh, I know I was that character. And identify themselves in the book, and frequently very, very, very incorrectly. So, it's always an amalgam and always interesting to see what people come up with. And so we've talked a little bit about inspiration, again, with Christie and other things. And clearly each of your books owes a great debt to its predecessors in each subgenre of mystery. And we know that, Agatha Christie for Amita and Venkat strongly. And Eloísa, you recently wrote a brilliant article for Criminal Element that talked about the authors that you had read or had inspired you. So I thought I'd start with you and see if you could tell me, who was your primary influence? Perhaps not as a writer, but as a reader that inspired you to choose the path or the genre that ended up being your book? Like before you even thought of writing it. So whomever, Venkat.
Sure. I started writing after I crossed 50. So I've read quite a lot before getting to the point where I wrote. The first inspiration for writing, I think, was Conan Doyle and not really Christie, because I started reading Sherlock Holmes when I was very, very young. And I was quite fascinated by the plots that he had. Then when I went on to Christie, Poirot defined the investigator I wanted. Holmes, I was in awe, but I never had the confidence that I could write somebody like Holmes, because Conan Doyle was intellectually very, very strong. Poirot, I thought I could, right? So my primary inspiration for the genre was Conan Doyle, and then for the detective was Poirot. So you see that in some ways, Atreya is also an understated person, a quiet person who's not brash, very similar to Poirot. As far as writing is concerned, Asimov, science fiction, was the first thing I read even before Conan Doyle. And that was, Asimov is probably my primary inspiration for writing. I mean, even right now I'm watching the Foundation TV series and I'm saying this is not very good. The books are absolutely outstanding. And if I look back at all the authors that I have really enjoyed, I think almost all of them are cerebral rather than emotional. Funnily enough, none of them have character-based stories. It's very plot-based stories. Asimov is about future of mankind. Holmes is a person who has almost no emotion but intellectually a powerhouse. So I think all of that influenced me. And if I see my writing, whether it's crime fiction or fantasy, it's along those lines. And I keep wondering, I hear a lot of other authors say that character is what pushes me first. To me, it's actually characters come second. I look at the setting, I look at the plot, and then design the character for it.
That's really interesting, and I had no idea about Asimov. Why have you ever considered trying your hand, or have you already, at a fantasy or sci-fi?
Well, fantasy, I've already written a series. That's what I started writing with. It's in a different name. It's in a different pen name. It's a 4-book series. I wrote it for my boys when they were in school. So it's a little amateurish, but the story, I think I really like it. Science fiction, in fact, interesting that you ask now. I'm in the midst of writing a science fiction, which is set in England and India in 60 years into the future. I'm about halfway through. Once I finish that, I'm going to pick up the writing the 4th Atreya.
No, that's wonderful. And as long as he doesn't go to space.
He won't. He'll be grounded.
Okay. And Amita, what about you? Who were your, especially as a reader, what set you on the path to Aria?
Thanks, Chantel. I think, when I'm writing, obviously I'm not really thinking about inspirations, that have come before as a reader, but I'm connecting the dots sort of afterwards, after the fact. But I would say that while I love crime fiction, I love the kind of the figuring out of clues and the psychological or emotional motivation to crime. I love that aspect of crime fiction, but it's also those villagey kind of Agatha Christie type stories have needed an update for such a long time. So for my crime fiction, there's a Fleabag kind of twist, to the writing where, and I relate to what Venkat said about, not having the stereotypical detective character, the alcoholic, celibate detective character. I didn't want that. I wanted someone who was relatable. I wanted a young woman who, is looking for love, gets it wrong, is lonely at times, is vulnerable. There's a romantic, very strong romantic element to the series, and I wanted that. I really, so I'd say Fleabag, meets Agatha Christie are sort of my sort of the touch points where Aria comes together. So for me, that aspect of taking something that I love reading and I grew up reading and putting a contemporary twist on it, putting something that is more 2021. Sorry, I had to look at my computer just to think about what the year is. The last 2 years have really messed with my brain. So yes, the 2021 twist on the cozy kind of villagey mystery was really was important, but sort of I hadn't connected that until after the fact. But yes, that's what's important now.
Okay, and keep a pin in that Fleabag updating Christy, because I want to circle back to that. But first, Eloísa, what about you? And what reading before? I know, like I said, you did that wonderful list in Criminal Elements. So anybody who's listening, definitely look that up. It has some great reading recommendations. But even before you started writing Repentance and Our Inspector Alzada, what reading do you think really inspired you to even sit down and try your hand at it?
Well, I like the idea that I was introduced to about a reader's DNA, and that the reader's DNA also made up for a writer's DNA. So that we are a sum really of what school you went to and what books you were made to read, and that so many books in your early formative years that aren't even your choices to make, no, but that will shape you in one direction or the next. What books you have at home. In my case, my parents are very eclectic readers, and I became one too. So I read from a biography of Hannibal Barca to Grisham, and from Claudia Piñeiro to surrealist theater, where I have no bounds, and I'm with that with all my fiction. Also, I could do the same with from Game of Thrones to Fleabag, probably. Clearly, I have an influence in the Latin writers that I've read, and that most of them were crime fiction-ish, because most of them are characters that stumble upon crime or who live in a dangerous, corrupt situation, and then have to take the bull by the horns, more than the classic detective in that sense. And people, I just finished one from Argentinian Claudia Piñeiro, and the main character is a Parkinson's diseased 63-year-old woman in search for her daughter through the streets of Buenos Aires. So it's a mystery that is not a mystery in that sense. And so, yeah, I think that I stumbled more or less into the genre, and then enjoyed myself here now that I'm in it with Repentance.
Well, that's a wonderful segue, Eloísa, because I liked that, because it's a mystery that you read that's not a mystery. And honestly, that's exactly what I loved about your book, because obviously you've all been inspired by classics that you've mentioned, but each of you in your books that we're talking about tonight have, intentionally or not, I think most cases intentionally, put your own individual personal mark on the genre. Venkat, like we talked about, Christie's mystery, but it's a setting in modern day India, and it's not the typical detective. Amita with the Fleabag-esque sex on the page in a cozy, and Eloísa with a police procedural that really isn't a police procedural, but more of a journey of moral self-discovery for your protagonist. So it's all a larger thing couched in these basic genre that we're accustomed to. So on this one, I'd like to start with Amita, because I kind of know her answer, but was subverting the genre a little bit something that you set out to do?
Funnily enough, Chantal, no, because the strange thing is, as a reader, when I'm reading or when I'm watching something, I'm not thinking about the genre. I am thinking by author. I like an author and I want to read them again, and I read them again and again. So definitely that, but I rarely think of genre purity, to call it that. So no, it wasn't something I set out to do, but after having done it and after having seen the reactions that people have, I realize I am doing something with it. So it's to me, it again, this thing came out fully formed almost, so the crime fiction element is something I love, and it almost, to me, making a modern day female character, Arya, I couldn't have done her in any other way. I couldn't have made her sort of someone who doesn't think about or talk about sex, or someone who isn't looking for love or doesn't talk about loneliness. And she has loads and loads of social anxiety as well. To me, it couldn't have been in any other way. If I'm writing true to myself, and I'm writing true to 2021, that's the character, and one thing that's really important to me, again, I'm thinking about this maybe after the fact, but one thing that's really important to me is this, many times the tropes of women trouble me in crime fiction. The tropes that we see are either of a desirable woman or someone who has suffered from having been in terrible sexual situations. And I wanted to go away from those tropes, and I want someone who is more forthright about sex, is forthright about about her desires, about her loneliness, about her anxieties. So I wanted someone who would break those norms and tropes that are very, very actually problematic. They're problematic towards sort of women, towards female sexuality, towards female agency. So I wanted someone with agency. I wanted somebody. I want someone who who has that kind of the contemporary feel to her. So that was really that has become more and more important as Arya's story and journey continue.
That's really great. Now, I know, Eloísa, you kind of leaned into some of the tropes, but at the same time, like I said, it's a police procedural that's really not a police procedural. So did you go in intending to do that?
I did not. In the beginning, he was a civil. I didn't want him to be involved in the military regime in the past, in 1981. And he was just a regular, I don't remember if he was, for a minute there, he was a teacher, I think. Or I didn't want him to be a painter, which is the normal stand-in for a writer, no? This is my character, but it's not me because it's a painter and it's completely different. But I wanted him in the gray zone. I made him in the end a detective because I didn't want him to be able to get off the hook and be able to say, I didn't know. I was able to look the other way and continue to live my life. And these horrible things happened, but I was just part of the civil society and had nothing to do with the dictatorship. And being a detective made him perhaps more interesting to me, not a flat out guilty person, but in the gray area of perhaps a reticent collaborator or a passerby, something more than a passerby, let's say. And that's how I was introduced into the world of police procedurals. Really, I had to learn lots and lots about being a police officer, even though then in subject, I think that I distance myself from it. And indeed, it's not a police procedural that is only a police procedural, at least. So yeah, that was my path.
Yeah, no, I fell in love the first time I read Repentance, and it's kind of funny because of the genres. I mean, no offense meant to anybody, but I have never been the biggest fan of a police procedural. And so when I got my hands on this, I wasn't sure what to expect. And I was just thrilled with it. And like I said, it's a police procedural that has all the best parts of it, but it's also completely not a police procedural. So it's brilliantly done. And Venkat, what about you? I know that you talked about, you wanted to showcase the history of India and the various parts of it, but how about kind of, remaking the genre in a modern way?
Like Amira, I don't think genres. I think authors. So there are 4 genres that I basically like. It is fantasy, science fiction, crime, and humor. Humor, I just can't write. I'm just incapable of that. Other 3, I can write, right? But for each of them, I want them to be different from what I have read. Like in the case of of Will to Kill and Die Dial, what is different is it is a cozy whodunit, a traditional mystery set in India where we don't have anything at all, right? So that's the difference in as far as the Atraya mysteries are concerned. And if I go to my earlier books in crime, there is hardly any corporate fiction in India, corporate thrillers in India. So I do look for something different, making it different, but I wouldn't call it a genre redefining kind of a step. It's just different from what I've read.
Great. So one last thing before we open it to the audience, because I can see that we have a handful of questions. And of course, I want to hear what's coming next for each of you and where we can find you and that sort of fun stuff. But since we have such a broad panel today, India, Europe, the UK, I wanted to ask kind of a more global question. As you know, American publishers, like Agora, and a lot of readers have been striving to increase the volume of underrepresented voices in publishing, particularly in crime fiction, but across the board in all genres. And so I was wondering if you could give us an idea what the publishing landscape looks like in your respective parts of the world, particularly as it relates to diverse voices. Anyone?
Yeah.
Amira.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chantel. Again, such an important question. Again, I'm learning as I go, and in the last 10 years have learned more and more about publishing. And in the last 10 years, the landscape has changed as well. I find that I'm learning what a big business publishing is, and it is a business. And as a business, it has the same kind of challenges or pitfalls of any big business. So what I find is that I'm learning that as a business, publishing can be conservative and stick to the thing that is selling currently. And if we tend to stick to the thing that is selling currently, it does mean that broadening out from what is selling currently can be challenging for some of the big publishers. So it's tricky. In the last couple of years, in the last 5 years, I think there has been an increasing call for diversity. Whether that shows up as yet in sales figures and who gets the 6-figure deals, I'm not sure. But I'm hoping that in the next 10 years, it will become more evident that there is a push for it. That said, I think it's really important to me to have multicultural characters in my book. And so in my books there's always a cast of multicultural characters, and that's important to me. I mean, partly partly just for the that's what London is. London is a multicultural city. If I'm writing something set here and not having multicultural characters, that would be strange, and even though many authors do it, so I make sure about that there's multicultural characters. I try and make sure that my protagonist herself, she's mixed race, and so there's that aspect already. But I also think that one thing that I think all of us perhaps are trying to do is that very often very successful underrepresented authors, the very successful ones have been literary, and I think what I certainly feel like I must try and do is have commercial kind of genre fiction be written by authors that have traditionally been unrepresented or underrepresented in this area. Why can't we write the comedic, quirky commercial novel versus the heavy literary tome? So that's something that's important to me, to be to be able to kind of open the doors for writers from all different backgrounds who can write contemporary stuff and contemporary twists on the sort of the more conservative genres.
Great, wonderful answer. And Venkat, what about in India?
Well, in India, I think the definition of underrepresented writers is a little different, because there's no question here of colored or white or any of that, right? So the question here is, are there writers of certain backward castes, right? So that is the definition of underrepresented here. There are, sorry, let me go. So that is the definition. But the publishers in India have a whole different problem than elsewhere. They are struggling to survive. Before they can even start looking for representing a mix of writers, they have to be able to survive and make two ends meet. And as one of my future articles will be coming out, will say, many authors have been turned down by established publishers. So the fundamental issue is that there aren't enough readers in India. Reading is not a big habit. Although we are a country of 1.4 billion people, English language fiction reading is very, very low. The most popular is self-improvement and management kind of books, but fiction is very, very low. But I'm happy to say that there are some publishers who are focusing on underrepresented people, be it women writers or Dalit writers or any of those.
That's really interesting to hear. Eloísa, what about Spain and Europe in general?
Well, I'm quite new to the business part of reading, to put it mildly. I must wholeheartedly concur with what Amita was saying about publishing operating as a business. I think that therein lies many of the problems of the calls to diversity and the time it is taking, perhaps, from the initiatives to actually seeing those results in the bookstores when we go to, and where those books sit, and specifically in which sections they sit, as is our case. But in Spain, there have been many efforts lately and initiatives, and for example, this year the biggest prize in our literature has been won by a woman, and when the person came up to claim the prize, it was 3 men who had written under a woman's name. Which sent everybody into a frenzy, not knowing what to do, obviously, or knowing what to do but not wanting to say those words in public. So I think that there's lots and lots to do, but I'm very excited to go into bookstores and see all these young, the women, the queers, the diversity in color, which is also in Spain a thing, to see them blooming, to start and seeing the sprouts of what I hope will one day be a forest of. I'm going to stop with that metaphor now. But yes, I think exciting and heavy lifting to be done, actually.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to open it up to questions. And McKenna, I want to make sure we get everybody in.
Yeah, we've got some great questions. That was a wonderful talk, as I expected. But we'll move on to questions, and I think I'll just call on people to answer. So there's no talking over one another. So first one is from Leisha. Do your book characters talk to you? And if they do, have you had to change something in the story because of it? And let's start. I'm just going to go in the clockwise order to start with. So let's start with you, Amita.
So, gosh, I wake up sometimes with loads of dialogue already written in my head. So they'd absolutely talk to me, and at all the wrong times in the middle of the night. So what I find is that they become, if I've written a well-rounded kind of believable character, they become their own person and they're no longer me. And I, unlike Venkat, I actually do write character-based fiction, even though it's crime fiction. So the plot follows on the characters, which means that at times I have to change things in order for something to work. There are other times where, for example, I said that, the romantic element of Arya's life is very important to me, and her personal life and personal journey is very important to me. So sometimes actually, something that I want to achieve in her romantic life or in her personal journey takes precedence over the plot that I'm doing. So they and her character, those details and her character details sometimes become their own thing. And I have to follow, the plot has to follow along. So absolutely, they dictate, once they've taken over my head, they dictate what's going on.
How about you, RV?
Well, all the time, the characters always keep talking to you. I think that happens to everybody who writes. And they shape the story. They shape, when I start, it's a very sketchy, a very sketchy overview of what I'm going to write, but the details are almost always decided by the characters themselves.
Excellent. And Eloísa?
I fear I might have already confessed that he talks to me even after publication, actually. It might have come in handy before, with the ideas he comes up with now. But yes, with Inspector Alzada particularly, who's such a bumbling, I don't know who he resembles, eloquent, expressive. My job was more to pull in the reins and not just be him rambling for 300 pages, but be like, oh no, we need to take care of this mystery, actually, to conduce him into that spot. But yeah, he talks to me all the time.
It's great. Okay, one of our favorite customers has a question for each one of you. So I'm actually just going to read the questions individually. So we'll start with you, Amita. Did the pandemic have anything to do with giving Arya social anxiety as a trait?
What a great question. Thank you. So I, funnily enough, wrote at least the first one, possibly the first, actually just the first one. The first one was written kind of before the pandemic properly hit. And then I wrote, I think, the second and third during the pandemic. So I'm so on board with this question. I get it, because today I was talking to someone about how much about social anxiety we have learned over the course of the pandemic. Some feel more social anxiety because of being isolated, and others feel less because they're, that the online environment gives you that much distance. So I'm completely with you, and I think Arya, she shields herself from people. So in a way, we'll find it easier probably once the pandemic hits in her journey. But certainly, one thing that I do think, in these books, because I'm talking so much about social anxiety, that it will connect with people that have recently gained a new understanding of their own relationship with social anxiety and social situations. So yeah, great question.
Okay, and Kathy was also wondering for RV, do you like that A Will to Kill is compared to Agatha Christie's stories? For me, it's a hook, or for Kathy, it's a hook as she loves Agatha Christie. Is she an author you admire and have read? And I know you've already touched on this, but how do you feel about all the comparisons to Christie?
Well, I feel honored. I feel that I'm nowhere near Christie in terms of the ingenuity, but I do feel very happy to be compared, because part of the reason of writing A Will to Kill was a homage to Christie.
Sure. All right. And Kathy was wondering for Eloísa, in reading the description about your novel, politics seems to help define it. Do you think politics will always be a part of your writing?
Wow, thank you for that question. I would hope so, in the sense that I do think humbly that writers have a responsibility to take on, not mandatory, but that there's a clear opening to talk about the issues of our time, among which are not only politics, but more the policies that shape social life in the sense of, in the global sense of social life. So I would only hope in which I'm working on now, I'm definitely incorporating the things around me that interest me, that worry me, that have me up at night. Not only Inspector Alzada keeps me up at night. So yes, absolutely, it is to be expected. Thank you for that question.
Okay, this one is for all of you. And it's interesting, you were just talking about the business of publishing. Did any of you hesitate to send out queries about your books? How about we just keep going in this order? Amita.
I have the opposite problem sometimes. I'm a bit trigger happy to send things off. I've learned over the years that I need to actually sit on a draft and let it simmer for a bit. I don't know that I hesitated necessarily. I was in a deal with HarperCollins at the time, and so it needed a little bit of renegotiation. But I have to say that once I connected with Chantel, it did seem very sort of alchemical, and it felt really right. And Chantel absolutely got what the book was about, perhaps better than I did. I'm trigger happy with this is ready, I'm sending it off. But then it turns out maybe I should have held on for a bit longer. This is what I think about in the middle of the night, Eloísa. Like I stay up thinking about these kinds of things as well. Not much hesitation, but sometimes you just connect with somebody like Chantel, and then you feel like, there's something here that needs to be explored. So,
how about you, RV?
Well, in many ways, I've been lucky. I have not had to send out too many queries. My first book that I wrote, it just so happened that Hachette India was looking for a book like that, and when I sent it to my agent, and I found I didn't have to write query letters for agents either, because my agent is somebody whom I knew through somebody else. And fortunately for me, my first manuscript clicked. So I didn't have to send too many queries.
Eloísa?
Oh, yes, I hesitated and pondered. I still do greatly. Actually, the first time that I ever sent out a query with the novel, when I thought it was ready to be sent out, it was done with my best friend, both of us like holding our hands over the send button until we both together like closed our eyes and clicked. After, of course, we had read the email thousands of times, and the text, of course, way more than thousands of times. So yes, I hesitate greatly when querying, but I might also say that it is perhaps that antsy, that moment of excitement that is actually an indication of it's really important to you. And I think that it's a thing to appreciate, that the resolve of many an hour and of days, collective days of work, or months or years. So yeah, the fact that it's important to you makes it all the more interesting, I think, to read them.
Great.
Hopefully.
So we have one last question. It's going to be a hard question, and I'm sorry that Amit is going to get it up first because it's just luck of the draw. What author, living or dead, would you like to meet, and why?
I think, funnily enough, someone else asked me this. I think I'd like to meet Georgette Hare. I know that, I don't know why. She's just so witty. I like witty authors. She does more than what and I don't want to sort of compare to anyone writing now, but I find that the work that she did, and she wrote about the Regency period. And she wrote mysteries as well, set in the 1920s. But many times when we take kind of the romance aspect of her books and just repeat that, it just becomes about the romance. But Georgette Hare had so much wit, satire. She was so witty about her settings and her characters, and she had loads of empathy for them as well at the same time. So to me, meeting someone as prolific as that, and someone who had that wit. She had problems in her writing as well, so the terms that we would now consider very, very politically incorrect, but at the same time, for the time that she was writing in and the kind of stuff she was writing, she had such facility with wit and words and humor, and passion, and all kinds of good things. So I think, I'd love to meet her and see what she's like in person.
It's a great answer. How about you, RV?
Well, the two people I would like to meet are Tolkien and Woodhouse. Tolkien, because one has read so much about it and about him and why he wrote Lord of the Rings and how the war influenced him. It will be a great discussion to have as far as Tolkien is concerned. And as far as Woodhouse is concerned, I would love to see and talk to a person who writes so well. I am fascinated as to what is his thought processes. How does he speak? It would be a fantastic discussion with him.
Absolutely. All right. Last but not least, Eloísa.
I'm a bit wary of the whole meeting your idol situation, but pressed, I think I will go with Italo Calvino. I find in all his writing, from the political and the journalistic to the novels, or that he might be like a really, fascinating mind to meet. Although, yes, with a caveat of maybe in person, he put it all in his writing, and then in person, it's not.
I think we all have to assume with these meetings that they're just as wonderful as their writing.
Yes.
Okay, well, that finishes us up for tonight. Thank you all again for being here. I know I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was really a treat. So I'm going to go ahead and sign us all off. And good night to two of you, and good morning to you, RV. And Chantal and I are going to enjoy the rest of our evening. So thank you again. And Chantal, thank you for being a wonderful moderator.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Murder by the Book. And I hope that, if anyone's interested in the books, they absolutely order immediately from you guys.
We appreciate that. Okay. Well, thanks to everyone for watching, and I'm going to sign us off.